Hi, and welcome to today's class, where we will be covering preliminary evaluations of internal controls. Internal control functions either prevent misstatements or detect and correct misstatements. Auditors use a system-based approach to gain an understanding of the systems, evaluate it, list their weaknesses, suggest improvements, and work out the level of control risk for the system. For example, two people opening mail, including cash, may prevent theft. Detective and corrective controls often occur together to detect or correct a misstatement that has already occurred. For example, a bank reconciliation by a person who's not involved in cash disbursement or receipts. The auditing standard ASA 315 identifies and assesses the risk of material misstatements through understanding of the entity and its environment. There are three parts to the structure of an entity: the control environment, the information system, and internal controls. Evaluating these parts as a whole will help the auditor get an idea of the control risks of the client. The control environment will cover the management operating style, organizational structure, assignment of authority and responsibilities, internal audit and policies. The information system itself is how transactions are recorded, and the internal controls are the policies and procedures management has set up to provide reasonable assurance the business objectives will be met. Evaluating these parts, as I said, is going to help the auditor. Preliminary evaluation of internal controls. The auditor studies and evaluates the system of internal control to determine which controls can be relied on. There are various stages associated with this. They will review and document the controls. They'll perform a preliminary evaluation of controls. They'll provide an initial report to management on its weaknesses. They'll provide an estimate of the control risk. Later, they will test the compliance and provide a revised estimate of the control risk, and finally report to management once more on the weaknesses found. So, reviewing the documentation. How do they do this? Well, they review the prior experience with a client, they make inquiries of management and staff, they actually inspect the accounting records, or they observe the client's activities and operations. The objective of the internal control system, as discussed further on page 153, is completeness, validity, accuracy, operational environment, safeguards, and accountability. The secondary objective is existence and occurrence, presentation, disclosure, evaluation, and measurement. The auditor notes the control and the objectives it relates to, documents it, and then tests it. A good internal control system will have the following features, which again will be discussed in further detail on page 154. There is the need for segregation of duties, authorization, custody, documentation, comparison, internal audits, management review of reports, security of assets and records. And again, your teacher will go through these in further detail. Within the book, there are also suggested internal controls for each of the following subsystems, which you will go through: accounts receivable, accounts payable, cash receipts, cash payments, non-current assets, payroll, and inventory. The control environment actually also includes the client's computerized accounting system. General and application controls should be part of this. General controls include things such as the segregation of duties, computer operation controls, hardware and systems software controls, data entry and program changes and backup and recovery plans, whilst the application controls are designed so that the recording, processing and reporting of data is properly completed. And there are three types of these controls: input, processing and output controls. The documentation of the understanding of controls will obviously depend on the size and complexity of the audit client. The more complex the internal control, The more extensive procedures performed, the more extensive the documentation should be. These are some of the methods of documentation for understanding controls. There may be a questionnaire, a memorandum, or a flowchart, and there are disadvantages and advantages of both of these. There will always be some limitations in any internal control system. Why? Because there's human error, collusion, management may override or ignore the controls, there's that lack of continuity, there's fraud, or there's cost constraints. Once an evaluation of the internal control system has been carried out, methods whereby methods such as inquiry, inspection, observation, reperformance have been used, any weaknesses that are found will actually affect the control risk. So if it's a low, medium to low control risk, then you can place reliance on the system, but we'll need extra compliance testing. If later substantive testing is to be reduced. Low control risk will mean less substantive testing, which is more costly and time consuming. Control risk is seen as the weakness within any one subsystem as a proportion of the total controls that should be found in that subsystem. So the following slide indicates how to estimate the control risk based on the answers to a questionnaire. So you can see some of the questions there. Are pre-numbered purchase requisitions prepared for all purchases? Or alternatively, are receiving reports pre-numbered? A questionnaire has been completed with a yes, no, and a comment. So here there were no answers in 3 cases out of the 10. Therefore, the control risk is 3 out of 10, 30%, meaning the auditor is 70% confidence that the controls meet the internal control objectives. The overall control risk of an entity, to find this, you take all the control risk estimates from each subsystem and find an average. This becomes the overall score. The auditor compiles a review of the internal controls and forwards a letter to management pointing out the weaknesses in the control. It should also include suggested improvements. So in summary, the auditor must obtain an understanding of internal control and perform a risk assessment procedure. They need to document this understanding, assess the risks of material misstatement, and design further audit procedures. At each of those levels, they will be looking at, in understanding, the control environment, the risk assessment, information control activities and monitoring. Ways in which they can document include questionnaires, narratives, and flowcharts. And then they consider the internal control and results of the other risk assessment procedures, test and control, and substantive procedures. Then make an assessment based on the controls operate effectively. Yes, if they do, they'll perform tests of these controls and evaluate results. Or do controls operate as effectively as expected? If it is no, they'll modify and complete substantive procedures. But if they do operate as effectively as expected, then they'll complete the planned substantive procedures. Thank you for your time.